You know the legends about Skinwalkers, right? Written by TheDemonQueenLuna. This past October, I had worked at a haunt, that is, a haunted attraction at a local theme park. I was pretty good at managing the big crowds, but what I really enjoyed was when the crowds would get smaller, and groups of 10 to 20 people were coming into my attraction. During the times when the crowds were thin like that, I loved scaring them with stories and legends that I knew about. And one of my favorite legends to tell them were the Skinwalker legends. I would start off greeting the group and tempting them with the offer to tell them all a story, asking if they would like to hear a local legend. As we live in the desert, and this haunt is tucked away in the heart of miles and miles of desert land. When they would agree, I would start my tale. Some of you may know about Skinwalkers, and for those of you that do, you might know that native Navajo and Hopi tribes are fearful to even speak of this creature, or to even utter its name. These monsters span from southern Arizona all the way through to New Mexico and the Mexican border, and across the lands of the native peoples. The Navajo believe them to be witches or shaman, an evil being with a supernatural power to shapeshift, typically by wearing the skins or masks of the animal that they wish to walk as. It's a practice which is looked down upon by the Navajo people. This power is gained after killing a close relative or sibling, and it imbues the being with many dark powers. The animal they appear as, however, always looks wrong. A deer or a coyote that stands on its hind legs and walks as a man does. A crow or an owl that has a face or eyes that look too human to belong to the animal that they mimic, and that their eyes glow red in the moonlight. In all the legends, it says there is always one sure way to identify a skinwalker. A skinwalker, no matter what, will never be able to move as the creature it appears as in its animal form. Skinwalkers were able to do things as well. They can move at seemingly impossible speeds, and they can mimic the voices of people, crying babies, your friends or loved ones. You know, voices that you would trust. They will lure you out into the forest or into the pitch black of the nighttime desert, and once they have you isolated, and you lay your eyes upon their face, it is said you will die an agonizing death. Skinwalkers can curse people, and they can cause them great suffering. Often it is said that they use a mixture of what some call corpse powder when seen in their human form, which turns your tongue black and causes violent convulsions until you die. Want to know the worst part about skinwalkers? The reason that native people dare not speak of it? Well, it's believed that a skinwalker is capable of reading your mind. And the more aware of them you are, the more they become aware of you. So, try not to think about it. But if on your ride home you see a coyote in your path, or you hear the drums of native people echoing loudly through the darkness, take care to drive quickly and pray that it will not pursue you. And then I would almost always be met with looks of horror and fear. It was my absolute favorite tale to tell, simply for this reason. I would tell this story over and over to as many groups as I could. It wasn't a good idea to talk about them. I would say as much with each recounting of the legend. And it's even less wise to do so in the middle of the desert, surrounded by inky blackness that engulfed everything that the park's lights didn't illuminate. But I did. I felt safe. Nothing would happen to me. It was, after all, just a legend. That was until I drove home after my shift, around 1 in the morning, after a night of telling this particular story dozens and dozens of times to guests. As I drove through the twists and turns of the pitch-black mountainous desert road that I traveled on each night to get home, I had my high beams on, penetrating the darkness just enough for me to see the road and the first layer of brush on either side of it. My headlights shone on an animal, a coyote. At first, I thought it was just the angle of the lights that had hit it and it made it appear to have no tail. But as I continued driving, I encountered the animal again, 3 times, each time within several miles of the last sighting, a distance that any normal animal wouldn't have been able to make, especially when going up against a car going 65 miles per hour for most of the journey. Each time that I would scan the road for wildlife, I would see it. It was there, just outside the light, just at the edge of the darkness. The coyote with no tail, staring at me from the side of the road. My stomach churned a bit, and I breathed in deep, trying to tell myself that I was just imagining things, that the coyotes had tails, and none of them were the same animal. It was impossible. It couldn't be. But I knew deep down that I was lying to myself. I knew that I was wrong. I knew that it was real, and it was completely terrifying. I'm relieved to say that I made it home safely that night. But still, every now and then, when I drive through the desert in the darkness of the night, or I glance out my bedroom window into the blackness, I can still see that coyote, that Skinwalker. I hope that it never decides that I know too much. But I think that maybe, just maybe, it visits me to remind me of its presence. That it wants me to continue to tell this story, to continue spreading awareness of its presence, so that it can claim the lives of those who are weak-minded enough to fall prey to it. And now that you know the story, maybe it will come after you. Smiling Skinwalker by JakobLmao. I've had a draft of this story set up for a while, but I've been too worried and scared to tell. It made me question, well, everything. My faith, my eyes, my sanity. I've decided that it's time to finally let others know about what I've experienced, as it may help me move on. At least, that's what I hope. I recently moved westwards to Arizona from the boring state of Oklahoma. I'm a devout Christian, and never once before this had I believed there were entities in existence that we couldn't hunt down with our modern advancements. It's 2019, for heaven's sakes. You'd figure if we wanted to find something, we would, and most of all, we could. It was the 23rd of December, 2018. I was in Payson, Arizona, a bit north of Phoenix. My friends and I, in our Christmas spirit, decided to head out north of town about 5 or 6 miles or so into the forest on a secluded trail. It was cold that night. Some of my friends shivered and displayed obvious signs of unpreparedness. I was layered fairly well, and yet the winds and frigid cold punctured through my layers and onto me. We wanted to make a bonfire, warm up, and enjoy ourselves and a few drinks. I knew as soon as I got into the car to head that way that something was off. I felt sick, uneasy, and something in my gut told me to just stay home. But I couldn't put my finger on just what, and I ignored my ever-so-looming feelings of anxiety. We picked up friends and headed to the trail. Now, I'm a huge nature lover and always felt safe in the confines of the forest. I felt in control and at ease. But not tonight. It may sound cliché, but I felt like someone or something was watching me when we finally got there. And when I had gotten far enough down the trail that turning back would be no hasty endeavor, it finally hit me as to why it all felt so eerie. That same year, during the weeks prior to Thanksgiving, I was here before. It's not a spot that we usually go to, therefore, I was not familiar with it, nor were my friends. We were coming out for the same reason we were here in December, for a few drinks around a bonfire. It was late. I, however, hadn't had any spirits that night. It was my job to gather firewood. I didn't mind. My chance to survey and explore the area around us wouldn't be bad. Before I even left our area, things took a turn for the strange. I was at the edge of the light, being cast by the small bonfire I was about to gather more fuel for. And in the faint glow of the far trees, I caught a glimpse of something dart behind a tall pine. I asked backwards to my friends if it was out of the ordinary for people to be hanging around in this spot. My query was only met with silence from them as they drank on. I took a few more steps beyond the comfort of the blaze, keeping my eyes affixed on the tall, shadowy figure behind the tall trees. I could faintly make out that it had moved in a slightly bobbing motion, like a buoy on a tide. My immediate thoughts drew a blank as to why someone would be out here doing this. Maybe I was seeing things, or it was some sort of prank of some sort. I opened my mouth to call out, or even to crack a joke, but was mortified when I realized that I could not speak. Something inside of me prevented me making any noise. My heart raced. As swiftly as it had come, it shot off into the distance like a bullet. Being startled so badly, I fell back onto the ground and kicked myself back like a spooked animal, scratching and cutting my hands as I did so. My friends saw me and laughed, thinking that I was drunk. I managed to stammer out a line of what I saw, but was only met with a few blank stares and laughs, making me sound stupid. For the rest of the night, I never even dared to step away from the light of the bonfire. Now, as I walked down that trail that frigid December evening, I remembered what I had seen and felt on that cold November night, and my stomach dropped. My friends were slurring out Christmas carols and other drunk epiphanies. I know they wouldn't listen to me even if I spoke out, so I ignored the guttural feelings and prayed for the best and walked on. I hadn't been drinking much this night either. I don't enjoy alcohol as much as my friends, and often I was the one responsible for herding them home when the night was over. However, to calm my tense nerves, I had a drink or two from some Jaeger we had chilled in the ice chest. It was Christmas after all, and it worked. We were all having a good time, enjoying our festive feelings and generally savoring the crisp forest atmosphere. Soon, nature called, and forgetting about my prior ordeal, I began to walk away from the fire to relieve myself. I walked a fair 300 or so feet away towards a big rock resting behind some fallen trees, not wanting to be seen doing my business. I was not even close enough to the fire to be able to hear my friends' voices echoing through the woodlands. From behind me, my friend Corbin, who had come along, called out my name. I'll admit I was tipsy, but nowhere near enough to not differentiate reality from a drunken stupor. I remember him calling out to me, telling me to give him a moment to finish. I zipped up and turned around to walk to the rock where I heard him wander to. I don't know what it was, but sure as all heaven above and hell below, it was not Corbin. It took a minute for my woozy mind to put this together and stop walking towards it, and I'm thankful I did. This being stood tall, at least 6 or 7 feet. Its eyes burned like fire. It moved from a dog-like four-limb position to standing tall. The light from the moon on this cold night radiated the body, showing off its dark, slender shape with an inhuman sheen. I began to sob, violently. My mind ran in panicked circles. Seconds felt like lifetimes as my world ground to a halt at the clawed feet of the beast that I was sure was going to take my life from me right then and there. I did the only thing that I could think to do. I dropped to my knees and I began to pray. This monster to my petrified brain had to have been the devil himself. To imagine him anything worse than it would be impossible. It did not like my pleas to God. An unholy shriek of what I can only think to describe as someone screaming loud with lungs full of water rang out. I screamed in terror with all of the strength I could muster. I lunged backwards across the forest floor, running as fast as my legs could take me. I fell a few times, I think in sheer panic. I just couldn't manage to get my body to work properly, knowing that that thing was near. When I returned in a panicked craze to the fire, covered in sweat, dirt, and tears, I managed to wheeze out what had happened somewhat through my sobs of fear. I could tell that they doubted whether or not what I was desperately stammering out was real or not. I think I was so horrified in that moment that I had a small seizure, because everything else is a blur. I remember going to the truck and leaving. I remember waking up the next day and receiving a multitude of text messages saying that I was either stupid or crazy, or texts from worried friends asking if I was okay. And I also remember the last thing I saw of the thing before I made my frenzied flee, when it smiled back at me through the forest and skittered off into the darkness. A few days after Christmas, I was able to get in touch with a native elder here in town. I was so scared of mentioning the event because I was worried of being mocked or him not believing me. To a twist of my thinking, I told him very vividly what I had encountered. He wholeheartedly believed me and told me that it was a Skinwalker. He then blessed me thoroughly and told me to leave that stretch of land alone and to never venture out there again. That the next time I might not be so lucky. And he didn't have to tell me twice. I know I sound crazy. If I were you, I wouldn't believe me either. But you don't have to. All you have to know is this: for the love of God above and all things holy, never forget that we are not alone on this earth. Sometimes during the night, whenever I look out my window, I catch the sight of eyes in the trees looking back at me. That Thing Outside Isn't a Dog by Moist Berry. Okay, so I live in the middle of the woods. There's a small meadow not too far from my house, which is where I sometimes see a deer or two, a fox on rare occasions, but that's it. Last week I was looking outside my window. Something I always do, since my room is on the second floor and I can always get a good look outside. I especially like to do it at nighttime. I really enjoy the starry sky and the trees moving in the slight wind. It's peaceful. Well, at least it was. I suddenly heard my dog whimper from downstairs, so I figured that she simply needs to go out to do her business. As I walked up to her, she looked terrified. Every time I tried getting closer to the front door, she would just let out an even more scared cry, giving me a clear sign that something is not right. I brushed it off as a simple stranger walking past my house, and I comforted my dog. After 20 minutes or so of cuddling with her, she began wagging her tail once again. I began walking upstairs to go to my room, but I heard the familiar noise of claws hitting the wooden steps right behind me. I turned around and I saw that my dog wanted to follow me, so I let her. Since there's no harm in her staying with me in my room, apart from her trying to eat the cat's food now and then. Just when I thought that my dog had calmed down completely, my cat, that was sitting on the windowsill and looking outside through the window, began bristling her fur and baring her fangs to what seemed like, well, nothing in particular. This time I got scared for real. I thought that someone might be trying to break into my house, so I looked outside to see for myself. I froze. Right in front of my house stood what looked like a dog. I could barely make out any of its features due to the darkness and the fact that the only source of light was a nearby streetlight. It was black and extremely skinny. At first I thought of going out there to feed the poor thing, but then I took a closer look at the creature. Its paws were twisted in different directions. The worst part was its eyes. They were completely white. Just two glowing white circles illuminating the rest of that thing's muzzle. After me and the dog had a short staring contest, deep into each other's eyes, it began making noises that I could only describe as gurgling, like it was choking on some very thick liquid, and something began to drip from its mouth. At first, I reasoned with myself that this could simply be a stray dog with rabies or something like that. But then it hit me. The liquid dripping from that thing's mouth wasn't the iconic rabies foam. No, it was blood. Not only that, the dog was too thin to be alive. Also, the eyes were simply too big to belong to any creature. It was too unnatural. I had a very hard time falling asleep that night, with both of my pets curled up on the bed with me. The next morning when I took a look outside, the only sign that the creature was ever there was the bloodstain on the grass. It must have been there for much longer than I stared at it, since the puddle of red liquid was bigger than before. After I took a shower and ate breakfast, I took my dog on a walk. Me and my pets are best friends. We understand each other, always. And that's why I got a very bad feeling as soon as I noticed that my dog is bristling her fur to look bigger. I walked a few more steps and I saw that my neighbor's cat was dead on the forest floor, a small puddle of blood surrounding its head. And what terrified me the most? Its throat was ripped open. I could tell that it was my neighbor's cat thanks to its signature V-shaped nick on one ear. Besides, the markings were easy to recognize as well. I moved the poor animal to the side of the pathway and decided to inform my neighbor as soon as I got home via a phone call. My dog was just as eager to go back home as I was. When we finally got back, I called my neighbor. She got really emotional. She thanked me and promised me to take care of the poor thing. Then I gave my dog some supermarket dog food, only to realize that I was running low just after that. The closest store is 35 minutes away from my house by bike, so a few hours later I decided to go out and get some groceries. I prepared my bike, opened the front door, and froze. I saw my neighbor's cat sitting on my porch. It stared deeply into my eyes. Its neck was not ripped open, but its legs looked so unnaturally long and thin. I instantly went back inside and locked the door. That was a few days ago. The dog still appears, somehow looking thinner and thinner every day. Yesterday, I looked into its eyes. I heard the sound of something that I can only describe as bones being broken, and I kid you not, the thing smiled at me. I don't go outside anymore. Now, this is not a creepypasta. I'm looking for advice. I don't know what to do anymore. Or what is that thing that I've encountered? Can somebody, anybody, please help me?